Hey, I'm Amanda. I'm a first year student and I'm a chemistry major.
Hey, I'm Beth. I am a sixth year in the PhD program in biology.
So, how did you decide what you want to study?
So, I am a cell biologist, which means broadly that I study how cells function, so how all of their parts come together to create this functioning unit. The way I like to think about it is how this brainless sack of water and fat and protein can perform these amazing tasks. And I think I became most interested in that really when I first began grad school. This was not a broader plan of my entire career. I wasn't always into cell biology. As a matter of fact, in undergrad, it was probably the class I skipped the most often. So I came into grad school thinking I was going to go into neuroscience, and then the first rotation I did was actually in the lab that I ended up joining, and I really fell in love with this idea of structure determining function. So our lab studies the cytoskeleton specifically, these polymers and filaments that come together to be essentially the muscles and bones of a cell. And we studied neurons, which is why I'd initially joined the lab, because I was thinking, well, I wanted to do neuroscience, and this lab looks at neurons. But it wasn't the focus. We didn't care about neuroscience and how the brain functions as a unit. We looked at cells, brain cells specifically, because they have this beautiful structure. They have this cell body at one end and then this ridiculously long axon that comes to a tip in the mature neuron. This would be a synapse. In the baby neurons that we study early in development, this is called the growth cone. So this is a little hand-like structure that weaves its way through the embryo and figures out where it needs to stop in order to make these meaningful connections that later form the nervous system. So when I joined this lab, I realized there was something really beautiful and interesting about the way cells need to be shaped just to perform their basic tasks. And I kind of fell in love with this idea of cells making shapes that are the most meaningful and functional for their particular function. And then I was all about the cytoskeleton after that. So it wasn't until grad school, get back to the original question, that I fell in love with what I do now.
Cool. So, what does a typical day sound like?
Our days are pretty unstructured, I guess. Every day looks a little bit different. Through the weeks, my main weapon of choice, what I do in the lab every day, almost always involves a microscope. I do a lot of live cell imaging and movie making, essentially. So at the beginning of the week, I need to get cells from something, and that something that we use in the lab is frogs. So we fertilize a bunch of frog eggs externally with sperm, essentially. And then we get a bunch of these early embryos from the frog, and then I pull cells out of those. And the cells I study are called neural crest cells. So these are cells that are multipotent and migratory, and they make up essentially all of the tissue that will become the face in the very early embryo. And I'm interested most in their motility, so the way that they move. So at the beginning of the week, I'll get a whole bunch of these embryos. The second day, I'll dissect these neural crest cells from embryos and plate them on cover slips, so these glass plates, so that these cells can adhere and then migrate out, so they actually move along my cover slips. And then on that second day, I'll do some imaging on the microscope. And then the next day, I'll pull massive amounts of data off the microscope and do a lot of analysis. So throughout the day, I'm doing kind of bits and pieces of any one of these experiments, sometimes 3 or 4 at once. So what all does that mean? In the frog room, I'm dissecting at the stereoscopes. I'm on these big, fire-breathing, super expensive microscopes for 2 or 3 days of the week. And then I'm doing a lot on the computer, this digital analysis type stuff.
So is it all lab work, or like school? Do you like go to classes, or is that more?
For the first 2 years, we do classes, and every program's a little bit different with how they structure both how many classes you have to take and then which classes are mandatory versus elective. So our class structure, we have genetics, biochemistry, a molecular and cell biology course, as well as a scientific writing course, and then I may be missing. Did I say bioinformatics?
No.
No, we have that as well. So we have this core structure of these classes, and then we have to take 3 other electives that can be kind of in anything vaguely related to hopefully something that will help us out. But that ends up being, I think, 9 total classes. So we usually get them out of the way in the first 2 years.
Oh, okay. And what do you think are the biggest challenges of grad school?
So I would say that both one of the advantages as well as one of the challenges is how flexible and unstructured it is. Nobody is telling me what I need to get done in a day, which is nice because we can work on our own schedule. I can come in at the crack of noon if I want to every day. I usually don't. And then I can stay as late as I want in the lab at night, but that requires a little bit of self-discipline. If nobody's telling you when to come in, when to work on each task that you need to get done, you kind of have to figure out what works best for you to keep yourself productive and not live in the lab and maintain a life balance while still checking things off your to-do list. So I would say the lack of structure is both a challenge and a strength of being in bio.
So, like, do you have a specific time you work, like mainly in the morning, at night?
What
Very
works?
Spaced out.
Yeah, what works for me is has changed throughout the years. I used to be somebody who really, really liked working super late at night, so I'd be kind of semi-nocturnal in that our lab is pretty busy during the day, and I found that pretty distracting, so I would come in at 2 or 3 in the afternoon and set up my experiments, and then I'd work through, half the night and sleep in. Lately, I don't know if it's that I just became an old lady or what, but suddenly I'm waking up at like 4 in the morning now, so I come into lab at 6 a.m. because why not? And then I'm home a little earlier in the afternoon. Yeah, the only commonality is that I've never had a normal sleep schedule, I guess. So I get a lot of time in the lab to myself when it's quiet and I can kind of work at my own pace or blast my own music, which I always enjoy a lot. So that's worked for me. But there are plenty of people in the lab who work a very traditional 9 to 5 kind of structure. So yeah, it varies.
What are your music preferences for in the lab?
Yeah, so I'm 31. I'm a little, not gonna say I'm old. So I have this very dichotomous split in the music that I listen to, which is music that was indie and cool about 14 years ago, which makes it very not indie or cool now, but I'm going with it. So that's one genre, and then the other is shameless top 40. I'm a runner, and I have to have a good beat or dance music when I run, so I got addicted to what I would call kind of crappy pop music. I'm into it.
My molecules and cells professor listens to rap music, he said, when he's in the lab.
Sweet.
Okay, back to bio. What do you think are some of the most interesting big questions currently being worked on in ecology or evolutionary biology?
All right. So I'm going to inherently answer this from probably my own bias, which is cell biology, since I don't work in ecology and evolution directly. We always have links. So one of the big ecology questions that has come up lately is this crazy fungus, the single-celled organism. It's called a chytrid, and it's a crawling fungus. It's actually kind of crazy. It can both swim and crawl. So one of the labs that I was interested in joining for a little bit actually studies how this single-cell organism can both form a flagellum and swim. as well as create extensions that allow it to crawl along a surface. Now, the ecology part of this is that this chytrid fungus is actually wiping out 33% of the world's amphibians right now. It's one of the most devastating plagues of any organism that has ever been experienced. So us cell biologists who are interested in the basic function of how this single-celled fungus can crawl are also, suddenly not just studying the basic science of this anymore, but are thinking about things like, if we can inhibit this fungus, this fungi's ability to crawl, then we can keep it from affecting so many organisms all across the world. So that's kind of an intimate link to my field, cell motility, that's currently happening in ecology right now. And then, let's see, where do I go from there? Yeah, I gotta go with the weird crawling fungus as my favorite problem that is sort of linked to my field. And then one of the big questions in evolution that I'm interested in is very closely linked. How cells, these, again, brainless sacks of fluid, basically, learn to do these elaborate behaviors like crawling. So at some point, or interacting together. So our very first organisms early in evolution are obviously single-celled tiny things like bacteria. But somewhere along the way, these single individual units learned to talk and communicate in a way, in a very chemical, basal sort of way, that allowed them to link up and form multicellular structures. So initially, like these amoeboid sheets of various sorts. And this concept of multicellularity, how individual cells learned that they could form more complex forms and then organisms by interacting together. That's a crazy Evo question to me.
Cool. Let's see. Why do you think diversity or inclusion are important to your particular field? Or just biology in general?
I would speak broadly in science. I think we need diversity to know the extent and breadth and depth of the problems that we need to focus on. I think if you are, I don't want to like shit on anyone right now. But if you're like male, middle class, and white, I'm just gonna do it. Anyway, it's happening. And you live in Middle America, then maybe like your view of the problems in the world would say our landfills are getting too full of plastic straws, and this is crowding, and this is absolutely true. We are consuming and producing much more waste than the world can ever deal with, and this is a massive problem. But if you live somewhere else, let's say, then you would say, well, the problem's also that this pollution is getting into the ocean and wiping out millions of fish that we live on, that our culture survives on. So how do we curb this overconsumption in order to save the wildlife that is native to our area? If you grew up of low socioeconomic status in the suburbs, like I did, then you looked around every day and saw that your friends who didn't eat more than you did, who ate roughly the same things, were growing up both with problems associated with malnutrition, and they were growing up obese, which is this weird dichotomy that we don't understand. So why is it that our food sources as low-income individuals are somehow both making us fat and making us incredibly unhealthy? Is there a way to create affordable, accessible nutrition for people that will essentially allow us to curb both of these problems at once. Why are we becoming obese on food that doesn't nourish our bodies? And how can we make food that does both nourish us and keep us healthy accessible to all humans? So yeah, I think the more diverse science is, the better we can all communicate and agree on the kind of problems that are really plaguing our world right now. I think if you do lack those kinds of influences and voices, then our problems will become, or our view of the problems we need to solve will be very homogenous, which is a problem.
Okay. Do you have any experiences from undergrad? Do you think really prepared you for grad school? Or?
So undergrad, maybe not so much undergrad. This was actually a bit of a weakness in my program, I think. I was in a interdisciplinary science major called, what did they even call it? Human nutritional science. So this was in the dietetics program and then made to be a pre-med major, so it also included these biochemistry capstone courses. And somehow, despite combining biochemistry and another scientific field, I managed to graduate without ever holding a pipette. So it was somewhat deficient in lab-based courses. Like, we had the biology capstone lab lectures and that sort of thing, but yeah, I never remember holding a pipette. So my undergrad research experience was 0 to none. And so I can't really speak to what prepared me for grad school. I still didn't totally know what I was getting into when I got to grad school. I would say completely opposite to that. What probably did prepare me for grad school was being in theater and music growing up, because I learned how to be sort of in the spotlight and accept criticism without letting it affect who I was or keep me from getting out of bed in the morning. I don't know. Because one of the things that we do a lot in science is share our science. So we do presentations in front of our peers at these both big and small meetings. And I think about 90% of the world or something is terrified of public speaking. That is a really common thing. And scientists are certainly no exception. So the very first time you do a presentation, it's really overwhelming and terrifying because your scientific work is something that's very intimate to you. It almost defines who you are because you spend so much time in the lab questioning and researching this one topic, and then when you get out there to share it, you're in this room full of other scientists, and critiques of your science may be something that you could very easily take personally, and also just you're there and talking in a microphone maybe in front of 1,000 people. That's hard. So growing up in doing both drama and drama and then musicals, and then as well as being a musician, I was on stage a lot. So that kind of dulled my fear of being in this public speaking situation. It's still hard no matter who you are, I think, especially when it's in a totally different context like that, like performing a piece on flute, very different than explaining my hypothesis, but it did make it a lot easier for me to push through that fear and present, which is a huge part of science, just communicating with other scientists. So I'd go with that.
Do you have like a specific project you're really proud of? Or you said you had to present your work. Do you do that often? Like, how often do people present their work?
So usually when you go to a conference, you'll submit an abstract of what you do, and this is the short version, 150 words or so. And then they'll select abstracts for talks. And if you don't give a talk, you do a poster presentation. So no matter what, you're sharing your science, either in a more small, personal, person-to-person kind of poster visit, or at a podium in front of the entire conference. So I do that 3 or 4 times a year, either giving a talk or a poster at a conference, probably. So yeah, pretty often.
Cool. What advice would you give to a first or second year undergraduate student looking back?
Undergrad? Grad. What is that?
Said undergrad.
Okay. First or second year undergraduate student. In the context of them wanting to be...
Like somewhere in the biofield.
In the biofield. Okay. Oh yeah, I know this one. Learn to code. Definitely learn to code.
I think another scientist spotlight. That was his recommendation. He said, learn how to code.
Probably, yeah. Because that's probably the most broad application advice I could give to anyone in biology. Like, if you want to study viral evolution or like robotic fish jaws or something crazy, like I can't give you too much advice that's going to help you because I'm a cell biologist who looks at frog cells all day. Like I don't know what to tell you. Good luck. But there are definitely, without question, applications for analysis in every field, and analysis can be made much easier if you know how to script certain algorithms or apply certain mathematical equations to broad sets of data all at the same time. And these things are greatly facilitated by even basic scripting knowledge. So just, learn how to use your computer. And you can do that no matter how, I think, intimidating it seems, because I have no scripting experience. I took no computational anything courses in undergrad, but I'm slowly dabbling and picking things up throughout grad school and enjoying it, actually, but I wish I'd started earlier. So yeah, scripting. It will be useful for pretty much any field that you can imagine in the next several decades, so learn to code.
Nice. I think we covered most of these questions. So, any final words or anything?
Final words. Now, awkward silence. There's been a lot of that. So I would probably say, sorry about the dead air, everyone. No, I'll take this platform for a second to talk about mental health. Grad school / life is hard. Especially, like, everybody complains about how hard grad school is, and my argument, of course grad school is hard. You're challenging yourself. A 9-to-5 job that's completely different looking than grad school is also hard in its own ways. So I don't think our profession has to be harder than you make it on yourself. But I think the difference is that often in grad school you're also going through a lot of transitions in your life. It might be the first time you've lived somewhere really far away from home. It might be you're newly married and you're learning how to live with your partner as a couple, or you just had kids and now you're trying to tackle grad school in addition to also becoming a parent for the first time. Like, there are so many people at every life stage that are going through this grad school experience together. And life is hard. So I already said that. But I think a lot of what makes grad school challenging is all of these things, in addition to also struggling with your science day in and day out. And what has really made a difference for me throughout my grad school experience is finally deciding at some point, I want to be the best version of myself coming out of grad school. I want to, like, suddenly be organized and have my shit together and, like, be comfortable in my own skin. And for me, like, that took going and talking to a therapist once a week to, like, really dig up my old dirt and get my mind in order, I guess. And so that has been really useful for me in grad school, because on top of all of the challenges of grad school, I'm not also dealing with, like, being a nervous wreck every day. So I don't know. That was all very disorganized. But I'm going to say, like, everybody has their own struggles, no matter where you're at in life, and it never hurts to talk to people about them. So value your mental health, no matter what you do. Grad school or not, like, you know, do what you need to do to take care of yourself.
Self-care.
Self-care. Totally, yeah.
Oh, wait, actually, one last question. Do you have, like, plans for after grad school, career-wise, or...
So, well, yeah. So, being a sixth year in grad school, I'm actually finishing up in the next couple months, so I've had
congrats.
to... Thank you. I've had to think about this a lot lately, and I am taking a postdoc, which is essentially another 5 or 6 years where you're a trainee in somebody else's lab. So it's kind of grad school part 2, in that you're trying to do completely different science, or science that's at least tangentially different than what you did in your PhD, and succeed in that field. It shows academic flexibility of some sort. So I just accepted a postdoc that I'll be doing in Oregon in the next couple of months, and I'll be studying left-right patterning in the early embryo. So it's actually interesting. We seem pretty symmetrical on the outside, but we have a lot of left-right asymmetries. Like, our heart is tilted in one direction. The lobes of our lungs are actually shaped completely different on the left versus right side of your body. And so I'm going to be studying how these asymmetries develop in early embryos, and how, like, some things develop asymmetrically and how some things, like your spine, develop symmetrically. So I'm going to be working on that, which is totally different from what I do now. And I'm both terrified and excited, because after 6 years studying the same thing, you're ready for new questions. And then also I've gotten comfortable with my questions, at least to some extent. I don't know. The more you study something, the more you realize you don't know. But you become comfortable in one sector, and then now I'm moving on to a new one. But after my postdoc, I would like to go into academia, I think. Like to be a professor. I love teaching. I love interacting with people. But I think part of what draws me to that is that I want people to understand how colorful and beautiful and, like, fun science can be. Because I don't know, I've fallen in love with the stories in science. So probably that comes from my, like, theater and performance kind of background, and loving creative writing and all these things that I thought would always make me a bad scientist, maybe, but have actually just shaped the way that I love science and why science appeals to me. So I hope, even beyond, being a professor, if that's my profession, I find a way to tell stories about science that excite people as much as they excite me. I don't know. I don't know if there's an actual profession in there. Maybe writing books? I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. But I want to tell stories about science. And I think you can do that in a lot of formats.
Start a podcast.
Oh, that's an idea. I don't know. Do I have a voice for radio?
Guess so.
You tell me.
Okay.
All right. Calling it done?